everyone, Pam Gregory, astrologer. I'm going to be speaking to you today about the second half of March and in particular the new moon that we have coming up in Pisces on the 17th. Now, just as I mentioned in the last video, we are still experiencing a lot of Piscean energy in the middle of March. A lot of Pisces, a lot of Neptune around, and the benefit of that is it can help us connect to source. It is inspirational, it boosts our imagination, it's to do with creativity, it's to do with an altered state where you lose a sense of space and time. So if you're listening to music, if you're in nature, if you're meditating, I've mentioned these things many times, if you're just doing breath work, which is wonderful, to close your eyes and slow and deepen your breath, that can get us to a different energetic state, an altered state where we have this greater connection to source, a greater connection to a sense of oneness. So it is absolutely beautiful for that, and it reminds us very much that we are a spiritual being and not just a spiritual doing, and I think that is discounted very often in the Western world. We always expected to be rushing around and filling our days, but this is potentially this beautiful fine perception of energy. Now, if you've recently experienced the less positive aspect of Neptune, if you've been feeling lethargic, low energy, don't know where I'm going, I'm in a fog, I'm confused, I can't focus on anything, that sort of feeling, that's Neptune, but it's being played, the music is being played less positively. We can become aware of that archetype through astrology and say to ourselves, okay, if I deliberately read some poetry, listen to music, go out for a walk in nature, buy some water, breath work, even just for a few minutes actually, to change your state, it will start to play the music positively because the music has to play somehow. So this becomes, we're using astrology to raise our consciousness by deliberately, consciously co-creating with that prevailing energy. And this is so important to understand because we can either play the victim and think, gosh, I just can't get off the couch at the moment, don't know what's the matter, or we can tune in and understand what it's about and say, okay, I can use this in a very distinct way to consciously co-create something beautiful. So very helpful for that. On the 17th of March, we have a new moon again in Pisces at 26 degrees 53 minutes of Pisces. This is at 6:11 a.m. Pacific and 1:11 p.m. UK time. Now, a new moon is always a new beginning. So see where 26 of Pisces falls in your chart and see which area of life it's falling in, which house area. If you don't know, just check out this link appearing above me. That'll take you to my store and you can buy a two-part video series which will explain very simply all that you need to know about what does it mean for you. But if it's also within 3 degrees of aspecting a planet in your birth chart, that will also give you a secondary meaning and possibly even a third meaning to what this new beginning is about. So it can enrich your life just by understanding those very simple principles that I share in the videos. Now, a new beginning can come via a thought, a sentence you read, a conversation you have. It can be very, very simple, but it can spark something in you which can lead to something in months down the road. So remember, it isn't coming to blossom, it's a new beginning. We still have 4 planets in Pisces here, the Sun and Moon that are always together at a new moon, and also Neptune and Chiron. And remember just the 3.5 days or so before the new moon is exact, this is a very sensitive time where we can tune into our psychic ability very finely, because I've mentioned this before, it equates to a couple of hours before dawn when the energies are very subtle and you can tune in. It's a very good time to meditate, for instance. So because it's Pisces, because it's a new moon, because we have this psychic few days running up to it, really turn inwards. And the other thing that emphasizes that is Jupiter in Scorpio is tightly trine to the Sun and Moon, at this new moon. Now, that's wonderful because Jupiter expands everything it touches. Jupiter is the ancient ruler of Pisces, so this can be about tuning into your dreams. It can be about creating a bigger dream, a bigger vision, a bigger horizon for yourself at this new beginning, at this new moon. So dream big. But it's also retrograde. Jupiter goes retrograde from the 9th of the month. So retrograde planets are introspective. They're about turning inwards. So we're getting a lot of messages at this new moon that it's very good to turn inwards. Have a period of silence during the birth of that new moon. And what is that birth about for you? What can you do to dream a big vision? Because whenever we want to bring something into our lives, when we want to manifest, we can take all the action in the world, but if we haven't done the inner work first, it doesn't work very effectively. Because the inner work is about tuning in, setting your intention very clearly, setting your vision of what you want very clearly, and stepping into that energetic hologram as if it is already here, it's already happened. I write a great deal about this in my recent book, How to Co-Create Using the Secret Language of the Universe, because what that does is start to broadcast that frequency of you are already in that experience, whether it's a new job, a new relationship, writing a book, whatever it is, you are already living it energetically. And it's the inner work that holds the power in manifesting. So that's very important to do. The other thing at this new moon is that the sun and moon are tightly conjunct to Chiron. Now, Chiron next month will be moving into Aries. It sort of ducks out of Aries back into late Pisces in October through to February 2019 and then is fully in Aries. But essentially, it spent about the last 7 years in Pisces from 2010. It's got an erratic 51-year orbit, Chiron. So if you have any planets in Pisces particularly, look back over the last 7 years, and if you can also work out when your planets were being transited by Chiron, what was happening for you, because Chiron is commonly called the wounded healer. It commonly brings physical illness sometimes, where we're a bit poorly, we're not very well, particularly if Pisces is falling natally in your 6th or 12th houses. If you've been hurt by someone romantically, then is Pisces in your 5th, your 7th, your 11th houses, the houses of relationship and lovability. Have you been hurt by a friend over the last 7 years? Look at your 3rd house and your 11th house. Do you have Pisces natally in your birth chart there? Because that might help you remember what has been happening. Because often, if we're not ill physically, there's a feeling of emotional or psychological wounding and a feeling of it's just not fair. It's just not fair. There's often a strong feeling of raw injustice with this. Now, Chiron shows us where we've outgrown situations. If you've got Pisces in your 10th house, if you're fired from your job in the last few years, you've outgrown it. It shows you the situation you've outgrown. If you've been hurt by a friend, it's been transiting through your 3rd house, you potentially have outgrown that company. So the message with Chiron is always to move us upwards in our spiritual perspective. So don't just stay in the pain and boil, move on in your life. And in months to come, you're very likely to look back and think, actually, that's one of the best things that happened to me because I've moved on to a different set of people who are more on my wavelength, etc. If you've been unwell, the thing that will work well for you with Chiron is alternative healing, not conventional healing, not going to your GP or your MD. It's about, Chiron in myth was a homeopath, he was a herbalist. Chiropractic work is obviously linked to Chiron, same root stem, but it's exploring alternative ways of healing. And particularly when it moves into Aries, that can bring about new healing modalities. And because we've got, up until spring 2019, on and off, we've got this semi-square between Uranus and Neptune, the new healing modalities could be very linked to frequency, to vibration. Things like sound healing will come much more into the mainstream, or new technological devices, Uranus, that change our inner frequency, Neptune, and boost our health. So we'll see a lot of that over the next 7 years or so. But coming back to where we are now, Chiron does have this feeling of raw injustice. That may be exacerbated at this new moon because Mars is square, very tightly square to Chiron. Mars is actually at 2955 of Sagittarius, right at the end of Sagittarius. So this can bring a feeling of restlessness or frustration or impatience or even anger with someone who's hurt you or with your wounds. It's just not fair. It's really not fair. I'm very angry about it. But try not to act impetuously with that. Try and step back and remember Chiron is trying to help us, because Chiron's orbit weaves between Saturn's orbit linked to 3D reality and Uranus's orbit linked to 4D reality. So Chiron helps us get well, for instance, by higher insights, by getting information from our superconscious, from higher source, to help change our state of health and our state of being. So it's very inspirational, that. So just don't lash out where you feel wounded or you feel hurt. Remember that it is for your own good that this Chiron transit is taking place, or has been taking place over the last few years for you in Pisces. I had a wonderful astrology tutor at one point, Howard Susportas, and he talked about Chiron as the wounds that make us wise, because they take us on a deeper path to explore how we can heal physically, emotionally, psychologically. Chiron in your birth chart starts off as a wound or a weakness, which ultimately can become a strength for us. So think of it very much in those terms and try and step back before lashing out at all at this new moon. What's very interesting with Mars, however, is because it's right within 5 minutes of a degree of the world axis at this new moon, it's actually exact on the world axis on the 17th and the 18th of March. Now, the world axis is essentially 0 degrees of Aries, Cancer, Libra and Capricorn, the cardinal signs. So Mars on the 17th of the month, and it stays there on the 18th, is moving on to 0 degrees of Capricorn. So whenever a planet is at the world axis, or also called the Aries point, it increases the potency of the symbolism of that planet. So a sense of assertiveness or even aggression may be coming up around the 17th, 18th as well. Mars then moves forward in Capricorn, the early degrees of Capricorn, in the last week of March, and it will be coming conjunct with Saturn. It's actually exact at 8 degrees of Capricorn with Saturn on the 2nd of April, but it's moving closer to Saturn. Now, this is quite complex energy because Mars is all about green light, setting goals, going, action, make it happen. Saturn is about, we've got to be careful, we've got to be cautious, we've got to think it through, we've got to pull back. Mercury will also be retrograde from the 23rd of the month. It moves retrograde at 16 of Aries, and that's a pulling back as well. That's an introspection. So potentially these energies can clash a little bit. It's kind of stop-go. However, if you can integrate these energies of Mars and Saturn, terrific together for long-term thinking, long-term planning, strategic thinking. So if you can be thorough and patient in your thinking, this can work superbly well for you. and see where early degrees of Capricorn fall in your chart, because again, that will indicate the area of life where this can be used really well for you. Mars Saturn can be very militaristic as well, very assertively militaristic, and Mars will be very strong in April and for much of this year actually, but I'll be talking about that in later videos. So strong Mars energy in that last week of March. So the energy you will see is shifting quite significantly from this dreamy, psychic, intuitive, I just want to kind of, sit by water and meditate, and to much more dynamic, cardinal, goal-oriented action as we move towards the end of the month, and certainly into April, that's the case. Now, we still have, in terms of assertiveness, we still have this very long-term ongoing square between Uranus and Pluto in the month of March, and it'll continue into April, and then it'll gradually separate. So we're kind of at the tail end of this square that we've had really for so long, since 2011. And you'll have heard me write and speak about this a great deal. I've got a whole chapter on Uranus Pluto in my first book, You Don't Really Believe in Astrology, Do You? And this was very strong in the 1960s when there was a conjunction between these planets. It was about civil rights, and lots of minority groups in society, be it women, or racial groups, fighting very hard for equality. Uranus-Pluto aspects are always about protests, revolutions, people rising up, demanding greater freedom, greater equality, greater recognition for their voice. Now, also, this is reinforcing, I talked about this in the last video, if you go back and listen to that, the Uranus-Pluto aspect is reinforcing the solar eclipse we had in Aquarius on the 15th of February, and the influence of that runs for many months. Now, I mentioned in the last video that the solar eclipse at 27 of Aquarius is exactly conjunct, or was exactly conjunct, the moon at 27 of Aquarius in the US chart. The US chart, which is set for the 4th of July, 1776, 10 past 5 in the afternoon, Philadelphia, when the Declaration of Independence was signed. So I mentioned in the last video we could expect the moon, in a mundane sense in the US chart, is about the people rising up, the people in revolution in some way. And of course we didn't quite know how that was going to manifest. Very clearly, this is to do with the student uprising, the student protest. And the students who are being incredibly impressive, articulate, and demonstrating great leadership in America for increased gun control are going to have a big protest in Washington, D.C. called the March for Our Lives. The March for Our Lives on March 24th. And this solar eclipse will still be operational at that time. Uranus-Pluto will still be operational. Mars will be becoming strong and assertive at that time too. So I think that could be a very big event. The other thing to be aware of in this second half of March is we have the Aries equinox. Now, equinoxes and solstices are where the sun moves into a cardinal sign in Western tropical astrology. So here we have the sun moving into the cardinal sign of Aries on the 20th of March. And equally, we have that happening when it moves into Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, etc. Now, what's very interesting, and I've commented on this before, through 2017, with 3 of the 4 ingresses of the sun into cardinal signs, if you set the chart for Washington, D.C., we had Neptune angular, either on the ascendant or the midheaven. That's quite unusual. In 2018, we have the same thing. We have 3 ingresses, this being one of them, where Neptune is on an angle, throwing its symbolism into a higher profile. So on the 20th of March, if you set the Aries equinox for Washington, D.C., we have Neptune on the midheaven. Now, the midheaven really represents the government, particularly in Washington, D.C. It represents the administration. Now, it could well be, and you make your own judgment on this, whether Neptune on the midheaven influencing the next 3 months, remember, could make the government much more spiritual in its outlook, much more compassionate, giving lots of money to charity and foreign aid, Neptune. Or you may think that it's connected to leaks, scandals, secrets, deception, things not being as they seem, and possibly even to the erosion of power in the government. Neptune conjunct the midheaven. Midheaven is the power of the government. It could also be that we see some major flood events. Neptune is lord of the sea in myth, so it can be connected to heavy rains and floods and tsunamis even, and that kind of thing. So we have to be aware of that too. So it's just very interesting to observe in mundane astrology how these bigger cycles are playing out. But a very interesting period indeed, shifting the energy from dreamy to dynamic, as I said in my latest newsletter when I go into much more detail about the astrology of the month. And you can subscribe on any page on my website to register for those. Right at the end of March, and I haven't included it, I'm going to do it in the next video, we have a blue moon because we have another full moon. We had one in Virgo right at the beginning of the month on the 1st and 2nd. We're going to have another one on the 31st, this time in Libra, full moon in Libra. So that's a blue moon, and I'll be talking about that next time. But remember, the energy is shifting quite significantly as we move into April and onwards. With Chiron, just one final comment really. I'd really like you to think, go back into any feelings of hurt or unwellness or rejection that you've had, that where you can identify transiting Chiron moving through your Pisces planets, if you have any planets in Pisces. It's so instructive because it helps us shift our consciousness if we can see the deeper meaning of what Chiron was trying to tell us at that time. Were we in the wrong relationship? Were we in the wrong job? Something we've outgrown, because Chiron wants to always move us on in our spiritual perspective and our spiritual understanding. So I hope that's helped you. Please check out my website for my books, my tutorial videos, my monthly newsletter. It was 6,500 words this month, so a lot of information that you can enjoy and learn from. So thank you so much for listening, and enjoy this new moon coming up in Pisces. Really enjoy that Pisces spiritual energy on the 17th of the month. Thank you for listening. God bless. Bye for now.